Resident Evil Operation Raccoon City is a third-person shooter set in the Resident Evil universe during the events of RE2 and 3. You play as members of the Umbrella Security Service or the USS Delta team who are on a mission to cover up Umbrella's involvement with the viral outbreak currently spreading through the streets of Raccoon City. On your mission, you will encounter enemies who have become synonymous with the series. Some of these enemies include Crimson Heads, Lickers, Cerberus, Hunters, Mr. X, and yes, even the almighty Nemesis. Of course, BOWs aren't your only opposition. You must also contend with Spec Ops forces who have apparently developed an immunity to gunfire. More on that later. Operation Raccoon City plays like your typical third-person shooter. You can run, hide behind cover, dodge, shoot, and melee attack. Of course, none of this should be too surprising to anyone who's played a third-person shooter in the last few years, but how does this game stack up against its contemporaries? Sadly, Operation Raccoon City feels like an unfinished game. All of the pieces are in place, but they lack polish. Sure, you can hide behind cover, but enemies can shoot you through it. Sure, you can dodge, but enemy hitboxes reach beyond their ostensible limits. Operation Raccoon City is plagued with technical issues including muddy textures, disappearing enemies, screen tearing, and faulty hit detection. But is it all bad? Of course not. Operation Raccoon City is not a horrible game by any means, but the problem is it isn't a very good one either. Now, before we delve further into the game's shortcomings, how about we take a look at some of the ideas that make it a fun experience despite all of its technical hiccups. The first thing I'd like to make note of are the character classes. Each character is equipped with specific abilities. For example, Vector is a recon class character, therefore he can be used to survey areas, infiltrate enemy strongholds through mimicry, and stealthily kill groups of enemies before they have time to react. Other character classes include the Demolition class, who make things go boom, Medic class, who can heal your team, Field Scientist class, who can pit enemies against one another, Assault class, who are walking battle tanks, and Surveillance class, which is most useful for detecting hidden items. Each character class has 2 passive abilities and 3 active ones. Bear in mind that only one of each can be selected at a time, and each of the abilities can be upgraded about 3 times. It's fun to experiment with different character classes and wreak havoc upon the battlefield with character-specific attributes. Speaking of the battlefield, Operation Raccoon City consists of environments that should be familiar to longtime fans of the Resident Evil series. Some of the locales that you will revisit are the RPD from Resident Evil 2, the Clock Tower and Graveyard from Resident Evil 3, and even the parasite-infested sewers of Raccoon City from both RE2 and 3. Something else that longtime fans of the series will enjoy are the remixed boss themes, as well as the boss encounters with William Birkin, Mr. X, or the Tyrant, and Nemesis. These battles are truly the most enjoyable parts of the game and seem to have been tailored specifically to tug at your sense of nostalgia. Even though most of these encounters devolve into battles of attrition, there are some specific instances where you and your team must draw bosses near environmental hazards in order to defeat them. There's also an encounter with a horde of tyrants in the Echo 6 campaign that really stands out, mostly because of the rail cannon that both ameliorates and exacerbates an already dire situation. Of course, the environments and enemies aren't the only things returning from Resident Evil's past. You will also encounter some of the icons of the series like Jill Valentine and Leon S. Kennedy. These rendezvous, while brief, do stand out, despite how badly some of the characters are modeled.
I still have to find my partner.
Fighting alongside your favorite characters is really interesting and nostalgic, though it was a huge oversight on the developers' part for not making these characters available in the campaign modes. While mods have been created for the PC version which enables classic characters for the campaign, in all honesty it seems like this would have been the most obvious feature to include in all of the versions of the game. Even though fighting alongside the heroes of Resident Evil may be fun, fighting alongside your friends is even better. Operation Raccoon City supports a 4-player co-op mode, which is a godsend for anyone who tries to play through the campaign with the horrible AI. Your AI teammates are more brain-dead than the zombies themselves. They'll constantly run into your line of sight, stand in the middle of groups of enemies, get infected, and of course, die. Oh, do they love to die. While playing through the campaign with friends helps to mollify some of the more glaring shortcomings of Operation Raccoon City, the brevity of the campaign is almost criminal. USS Delta's 7 missions will last for about 3 to 4 hours depending on the difficulty and number of players. For a series that is celebrated for its memorable and meaty campaigns, this is unacceptable, especially considering how bland and uninspired the majority of the USS campaign turns out to be. Now, I know what you're asking, but isn't there another campaign? Well, yes, there is. The Echo 6 missions, which are far more dynamic, memorable, and fun than the USS campaign, but there is one tiny little caveat: you have to pay for them. The first mission is free, so to speak, but the final 6 will set you back about $20. While the Echo 6 campaign is somewhat of a saving grace, it's also an anathema that should be avoided lest you feel that Capcom should be rewarded for their anti-consumerist practices. But I digress. So how are the controls? Well, I'll get to that in a moment, but before I do, I must talk about the weapons. Now, Operation Raccoon City features a pretty impressive list of weapons, which include various pistols, shotguns, rifles, and machine guns. None of the weapons can be customized like in Resident Evil 4 and 5, but each of the weapons have specific strengths and weaknesses. Or so that's what the game would have you believe. For the most part, the weapons do not feel distinct enough from one another to warrant inclusion in the game. You'd be hard-pressed to tell me the difference between the anti-material rifle and precision rifle when enemies are shrugging off bullets from both weapons, as if a shot from the anti-material rifle, the strongest gun in the game, were just a minor inconvenience to them. Now, as far as the gameplay goes, the controls are pretty responsive, but there are a few innocuous additions to the control scheme that don't seem to have any practical use. The most apparent one being the auto-aim. There is a button that you can hold down to automatically aim at enemies with your secondary weapon, but in almost all cases this feature is absolutely useless, because your character is forced to walk while the button is held. If you're in the middle of fighting a horde of ravenous zombies and lickers, walking around is definitely not the best course of action. Speaking of ravenous zombies and lickers, the enemies of Operation Raccoon City seem to have come well equipped with super armor, which helps them survive everything you have to throw at them. Enemies have a hard time reacting to incoming fire, even if it's a shotgun blast to the face. Hunters are a primary culprit of this unnecessary upgrade. In previous titles, hunters would go down with weapon fire as long as you weren't shooting them with a pistol, and even when you were using the pistol, they would react to the bullets that you fired at them. In this game, hunters are relentless in their pursuit of you and won't be downed until you've pumped them with enough lead to make them sing their swan song. One can easily surmise the reason for this upgrade's implementation, and that would of course be to account for the number of players that would be fending off each of the creatures. The issue that's created because of this is that of artifice. It isn't true challenge when the enemy just isn't affected by gunfire. It doesn't take skill to take down these enemies, it's just an effort and tedium. Take a game that was released a few months before Operation Raccoon City, Resident Evil Revelations. In Resident Evil Revelations, hunters were formidable, not because of their ability to soak up bullets, but because of their maneuverability, damage output, and their sheer numbers. It was fun, challenging, and exciting to take down the hunters in Resident Evil Revelations because even though the hunters were powerful, they were susceptible to damage, whereas in Operation Raccoon City, as soon as a hunter shows up, everyone begins to groan because they are just boring to do battle against, and take far too much ammo to take down. As was mentioned before, many other enemies were fitted with the same artificial challenge, the most perplexing of these being the Spec Ops soldiers. How can a single man shake off 3 point-blank shotgun blasts to the face? Well, ask one of the Spec Ops because they do it all the time. I believe that this problem was remedied somewhat with the most recent patch that was released for the game, but it still happens far too often. There are events that occur in the game that trap your squad in a room fighting off Spec Ops, and invariably your entire team will run out of ammo before all of the Spec Ops have been subdued. Even with ammo boxes spread around the map, if you dare dash to restock on ammo, the Spec Ops will take you down with perfect accuracy as you watch your mangled corpse contort with the horrifying realization that you never stood a chance. Of course, with your carcass lying motionless on the ground, one of your teammates will try to revive you, and in the process of doing so, they will end up picking up the weapon that you just dropped by mistake. Then when they try again to revive you, they will end up picking up the weapon they just dropped again. This will continue for a few moments before they too meet their fate. It was a poor idea to map both revive and retrieve to the same button because more often than not, when someone is trying to revive someone else, they will play gun ballet for a few moments before being able to select the person that needs help. Speaking of gun ballet, let's talk about my favorite gun in most games, the sniper rifle. In Operation Raccoon City, the sniper rifle is a glitchy mess. Sometimes it will hit enemies, sometimes it won't. Sometimes it'll dispatch of enemies in 2 shots, sometimes it'll take 5 shots. The sniper rifle is far too inconsistent and more often than not is fairly useless in most situations. There are also problems with the sniper rifle's attack range. At a certain distance, the rifle can't damage enemies even if you can line them up in your sights and see them relatively clearly. In any case, you're better off carrying an auto machine gun or shotgun. But all in all, the most glaring issue with the majority of the weapons is that most of them just don't feel powerful. When unloading with an SMG, you don't feel any force behind it. The auto shotguns barely stagger most zombies, and the grenade launcher won't even cause bosses to flinch. It's all very underwhelming, to say the least. Moving on beyond the campaigns, Operation Raccoon City offers a few competitive modes, including Deathmatch and Team Deathmatch. All of it's been done before and has obviously been done much better. For the most part, competitive modes bore me fairly quickly, and this game is no exception to that axiom. I suppose if you're into spending hours upon hours of killing people online, yeah, there is some fun to be had, but online versus lost its appeal for me specifically, and this game has done little to revive my interest in it. A multiplayer mode that I think would have benefited this game greatly would have been the survival mode, a la Mercenaries from Resident Evil 4 or 5, or even something akin to Horde mode in Gears of War. I'm sure that an online survival mode would have added hours upon hours of replay value to a title that's severely lacking in that department to most gamers. Unless you are the type of gamer who likes to play through the campaigns multiple times, or play through them on higher difficulties for higher ranks and faster times like I am. If you are that type of gamer, Operation Raccoon City gives you plenty of incentive to come back to the campaigns. There are a wealth of hidden items to be found, higher difficulties to be conquered, ability upgrades to attain, and trophies/achievements to collect. If you can learn to accept the game's rougher edges, there's still plenty of fun to be had, but that in no way excuses the pervasive technical flaws that you're often faced with. Operation Raccoon City is a game that failed to reach its potential. There are plenty of good ideas here, but sadly they were sloppily implemented and the game suffers fully because of it. If given a few more months of development, perhaps this title would have been able to meet or even exceed our expectations. Grievously, the product that we were supplied with at release was obviously unfinished and marred by technical issues. Now, the game isn't all bad. You will have a good time with this title, but only if you're a big fan of Resident Evil. It's fun revisiting some of the classic locations, fighting against some classic bosses, and meeting up with iconic characters. Of course, if you have a few friends to play Operation Raccoon City with, your enjoyment will be augmented greatly. Even the previously infuriating glitches somehow become an integral part of the experience, due to some of the absurdly hilarious things that may occur as you traverse through the campaign. Overall, I will be giving Operation Raccoon City a 5.5 out of 10. If you're a fan of the series, I'd say rent it if you're thinking of buying it so that you can get a feel for the game and make an informed decision based on your own experiences with it. If you aren't a Resident Evil fan but want to get into the series, this is not a good place to start. I'd urge you to pick up Resident Evil Remake for the GameCube or Resident Evil 4 for one of the various platforms that it's available on, and disregard this game entirely. Better yet, if you own a PlayStation 3, you can always pre-order the Resident Evil Anthology, which will contain all 6 of the numbered titles in the series. Or if you don't want to wait for the anthology, you can always download the classic games off of PlayStation Network, or buy them for the old PlayStation 1. With that said, I hope you guys enjoyed this review, I hope it was informative, and I will see you guys in the next one.